Prabhupada Paramahansa Parvajakacharya Asutara Sri Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda Ki Jai Namacharya Shri Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Name Sikahu Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sri Vasari Gaur Bhaktivinda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopakumara Shyam Kund Radha Kund Guru Govardhan Ki Jai Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Mayapur Navadvip Dham Ki Jai Gangamai Ki Jai, Yamunamai Ki Jai, Tulasi Devi Ki Jai, Bhakti Devi Ki Jai, Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. So today, of course, is August 23rd, as was announced this morning, for the next, right up until the 29th. At this time here in Balaram Hall, we'll be having different devotees, Srila Prabhupada's disciples, coming and talking their memories of Srila Prabhupada. This first day has undergone some changes. It was initially going to be Daivashakti Mataji, who's of course gave class this morning, and that was changed and to myself and Bibi Govinda Maharaj, but he had a little accident today and he broke his wrist, so he's fine. I just spoke with him, everything is okay, but time things change, so unfortunately he won't be here this afternoon. So that leads it to my speaking, opening it up this evening to Srila Prabhupada's memories. And of course today is a very special day on our calendar. We know we're doing this week because it's leading up to Srila Prabhupada's Vyas Puja Day, which is the 125th anniversary of Srila Prabhupada's appearance here. And today, of course, is special on the calendar as well. The actual day, we know Prabhupada left from Calcutta, India on the Jaladuta was August 13th, I believe. But today, this day, which is August 23rd, was the Tithi. On the lunar calendar, this would be the day that Srila Prabhupada had left for America. So, I was thinking various things, and I wanted to start, I hope no one minds, I don't think you will. There's, of course, thousands of letters that Srila Prabhupada wrote over the years to his disciples as he was forming his society and training his devotees. Now, both of these devotees, they joined very early, 1966 and 1967. And in 1969, they both wrote Srila Prabhupada very similar letters asking Srila Prabhupada a question. And Srila Prabhupada, in his humility and as their spiritual master, he gave them certain instructions explaining. So this first letter I'll read, these are not too long, and he says, and another thing, when Prabhupada, which was also how Srila Prabhupada did things, if you sent a letter to Srila Prabhupada, which being with Srila Prabhupada for quite some time, I saw many letters come into him. And in these letters, sometimes devotees would literally ask a dozen different questions. Some of them would even mark the questions, one through whatever, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Some of the questions were very simple. Some might be very profound, require certain answers. But Prabhupada always answered things in the exact way they were asked. He didn't pick what he considered perhaps was the most important question and answer that, or the least important answer that, and moving along. Just as you asked a question, he would answer it. And also as our spiritual master, he would tell us that it was his duty to answer all of our questions, no matter how simple, or as he said, sometimes required only common sense. If you asked him a question, he carried out his responsibility, always carried out his responsibility and gave an answer. So in this one, and right away he says, the answer to your ISKCON questions are as follows. This is also something else. Back in those days, in the 60s and the 1970s, an ISKCON was a platform where devotees would discuss philosophy. They would question and answers, have conversations, and discuss amongst themselves. ISKCON wasn't a platform where devotees would come in and talk about all their difficulties in the temple room, or how the brahmachari ashram was like this, and how the prasadam wasn't nice. It was actually based on the philosophy. So that was the purpose of ISKCON. And you can tell by here, this is such a question. And Prabhupada says, the answer to your questions are as follows. Unless one is a resident of Krishna Loka, one cannot be a spiritual master. That's the first proposition. A layman cannot be a spiritual master. If he becomes so, then he will simply create a disturbance. And who is a liberated person? One who knows Krishna, as stated in Bhagavad-Gita 4th chapter. Anyone who knows Krishna in truth is immediately liberated. And after quitting the present body, he immediately goes to Krishna. That means he becomes a resident of Krishna Loka. As soon as one is liberated, he is immediately a resident of Krishna Loka. And anyone who knows the truth of Krishna can become a spiritual master. That's the version of Lord Chaitanya. So to summarize the whole thing, it is to be understood that a bona fide spiritual master is a resident of Krishna Loka. Your next question, whether the spiritual master was formerly a conditioned soul. Actually, a bona fide spiritual master is never a conditioned soul. There are three kinds of liberated persons. They're called Siddha, Kripa Siddha, and Nitya Siddha. Siddha means one who has attained perfection by executing the regulative principles of devotional service. Kripa Siddha means one who has attained perfection by the special mercy of Krishna and the spiritual master. And Nitya Siddha means one who is never contaminated. The symptoms of Nitya Siddha is that from the beginning of his life, he is attached to Krishna, and he is never tired of rendering service to Krishna. So we have to know what is what by these symptoms. But when one is actually on the Siddha platform, there is no such distinction as who is Siddha, Kripa, or Nitya Siddha. When one is Siddha, there is no distinction what is what. Actually, listen, every living entity is eternally uncontaminated, although he may be in the material touch. That is the version of the Vedas. Asanga ayam purusha. The living entity is uncontaminated. Just like when there is a drop of oil in water, you can immediately distinguish the oil from the water. And the water never mixes with oil. Similarly, a living entity, although in material contact, is always distinct from matter. You are correct when you say, when the spiritual master speaks, it should be taken that Krishna is speaking. That's a fact. A spiritual master must be liberated. It doesn't matter if he has come from Krishna Loka or he is liberated here, but he must be liberated. The science of how one is liberated is explained above, but when one is liberated, there's no need of distinction whether he has come directly from Krishna Loka or from the material world. In the broader sense, everyone comes from Krishna Loka. When one forgets Krishna, he is conditioned. When one remembers Krishna, he is liberated. I hope this will clear up these points. Then he speaks about Narada Muni. In his previous life, he was a maidservant's son, but by the mercy of the devotees, he later on became Siddha, and next life he appeared as Narada, with complete freedom to move anywhere by the grace of the Lord. So even in his previous life, he was a maidservant's son. There was no impediment on the achievement of his perfect spiritual life. Similarly, any living entity who is conditioned can achieve the perfectional stage of life by the above-mentioned processes, and the vivid example is Narada Muni. I was speaking about this in the temple, Radha Parthasarathi temple the other day. When we joined, I joined 1971, April 1971, the mood of the devotees was always that we could become completely Krishna conscious in this lifetime, and at the end of this life go back home, back to Godhead. And that was the mood that Srila Prabhupada instilled in us. He gave us that encouragement, he gave us that confidence that in this very life we could become completely Krishna conscious. You know, you see that one video, Mother Visa in Australia, he was, the devotees in Australia, they did very well because they recorded videos, so many classes of Srila Prabhupada, which were mostly all in the evening and were attended by many outsiders who asked many questions. And the one devotee, of course, in the 70s, they were also all very new devotees. The devotee said, how long does it take to become Krishna conscious? Prabhupada said, the moment one could become Krishna conscious. So, based on the question that this devotee asked, Prabhupada said, so I do not know why you have asked about my previous life, whether I was subjected to the laws of material nature. So even though accepting that I was subjected to the laws of material nature, does it hamper my becoming spiritual master? What is your opinion? From the life of Narada, it is distinct that although he was a conditioned soul in his previous life, there was no impediment of his becoming the spiritual master. This law is applicable not only to the spiritual master, but to every living entity. Thousands of examples are explained in our books that the conditioned soul is never affected with the material body. Liberation means liberation from this changing condition. And then Prabhupada gets more personal. He said, so far I am concerned, I cannot say what I was in my previous life. That in itself is a very interesting statement. We hear so many stories, devotees going to this astrologer, that astrologer, finding out they were great Brahmins in their last life, they were this in their last life and that, and they committed this offense. Prabhupada immediately says, I cannot say what I was in my previous life. Which of course, if he wanted to, Prabhupada could say. And Prabhupada could say he was always liberated, but he says it very simply. I could not say. But one great astrologer calculated that I was previously a physician and my life was sinless. Besides that, to corroborate the statement of Bhagavad-Gita, Suchinam Srimatam Gehe Yoga Brishashta Samyayate, which means an unfinished yogi takes birth in rich family or born of a Suchi or pious father. I am laughing because of a story Prabhupada told myself in Paramahamsa. By the grace of Krishna, I got these two opportunities in the present life to be born of a pious father and brought up in one of the richest aristocratic families of Calcutta, Kashinath Malik. The Radha Krishna deity in this family called me to meet him. And therefore, the last time when I was in Calcutta, I stayed in that temple along with my American disciples. He says, although I had immense opportunities to indulge in the four principles of sinful life because I was connected with a very aristocratic family, Krishna always saved me. And throughout my whole life, I do not know what is illicit sex, intoxication, meat eating, or gambling. So far my present life is concerned, I do not remember any part of my life when I was forgetful of Krishna. So this is, of course, Prabhupada's humility here, but he's stating, as I mentioned in class sometimes, Prabhupada told me he remembers being 6 months old and being held by elder sister. He said, I was maybe 6 months old. One of the things that was so nice being with Srila Prabhupada, his memory. Prabhupada, he would speak about when he was 3 years old, 4 years old, different things that happened in his life. And of course, they were always very pleasant memories. I was, today again is special when Prabhupada left, boarded the Jaladuta. As was mentioned this morning, when he was on the Jaladuta and he suffered a heart attack, and then he suffered another heart attack. He was in Mayapur, and he called Paramahamsa and myself into his room, and he described that situation to us, how he had had these heart attacks. And he said, of course, he was thinking that could be the end. You know, the pain that was there, the struggle that was there. But he said, as he describes, as was described this morning, he said, I had a dream. And that's what he said. He said, I was on a boat, and all the different incarnations, they were rowing him, the boat, to safety. And then he said, when I woke up from that dream, I could understand that Krishna's protection was there. And then he also described how the Atlantic Ocean, which was always, the Atlantic Ocean was considered one of the most rough oceans when you got into the Atlantic Ocean. But they described, the wife of the captain said it was like a lake. They were so amazed. Literally, Krishna had just made everything so peaceful for Srila Prabhupada. But of course, his struggles didn't end when he got to America. Prabhupada told us for our own instruction, for our own understanding. But my being with him, I could always understand Prabhupada never complained. He never said it in such a way that it was something that was difficult to understand, or why did he have to go through it. He would just describe things almost in a very detached way. I told you Paramahamsa Swami was with me. He was Maharaj. At the time he was Prabhupada's secretary. And he called us both into his room. Sometimes he would call sannyasis into his room. He would give them instructions, trying to maintain that sannyas. These were young boys. Paramahamsa, he was younger than I was. So I was 23 at this time. So he was already sannyasi. He was only like 22, 21 years old. Prabhupada had given him sannyas a year or two before. And he came in and he said to us, once I was on a train, and he said he was approached by a very beautiful young lady. He said, at that time I was doing business. He said, and she was definitely interested in him. Krishna saved me. Prabhupada never had, but he would give instructions in this way. Like when he was on the airplane. He was on an airplane once in Europe, and he was flying in or out of Italy. Italy, of course, is known for beautiful, beautiful ladies. So Prabhupada, when he would get off of a plane, as he did anywhere, he didn't like, it's like we have here in the temple, you know, Prabhupada liked social distancing. Never one was just up against him. So when he would get off of a plane, there were always, as he was in coach, you know, just economy class, so he wasn't at the front of the plane. So like everyone else, he had to stand in line. But he never just stood directly behind the next person. There was always some space there. But in this one flight, he's standing behind, and in front of him was a young lady, and of course behind him is his entourage, his disciples. So Prabhupada's standing there, and he sees the woman in front of him, long hair down around her shoulders. And he turns to his disciple, and he said, he didn't whisper, he just said, "She's very beautiful." Which of course his disciples, these were like untouchable things to say, because we wouldn't know how to respond, because our attachments were there. But Prabhupada just said, "She's very beautiful." But the girl heard Prabhupada, and she turned around and smiled. Of course, any girl hears a compliment, she was very happy. And she turned around and said, oh, thank you. And Prabhupada said, it's not a compliment. He said, it's just a fact. So this was everything Prabhupada saw. He saw his own special transcendental way. I said sannyasis. He had one of his disciples, he was also from 1967, and he was one of the very first sannyasis, so I don't know, maybe that was 70, 71, before that, but anyway, he was given sannyas, like in, this particular one was given sannyas in 1972. He was married, his wife was a devotee, they were both devotees, but he took sannyas. At that time, many were eager, whether they were grahastha or brahmachari, they had that passion to want to be sannyas, to preach. Preaching would be better. That was the idea. If I take sannyas, my preaching will be better. So 1972, right here at Radha Damodar Temple, he was one of the devotees that took sannyas. So now this was just 1 year later, and he was Prabhupada's secretary for a short time. Shyama Sundar had been, when I became Prabhupada's servant, Shyama Sundar was the secretary. And to me, it was like he had always been Prabhupada's secretary. By that time, he had been secretary for more than a year. But, so I always thought that's how everything was always going to be. But one day, all of a sudden, he wasn't Prabhupada's secretary. So just like Prabhupada having to get a new servant, he had to get another secretary, which was even more of a challenge. Being the servant, you had to be able to massage, cook a little bit, or cook a lot. But to be secretary, you had to have a variety of talents, keeping track of everything, organizing all the travel, all the visas for everyone in the party, all the letters Prabhupada was getting, take dictation, type out the letters, get Prabhupada to sign them. So anyway, this devotee, he became Prabhupada's secretary. So now he had been sannyasi for about 8 months. And he was struggling. He was young, he was about 30 at the time, but he was struggling in his renunciation. So much so he even was talking to me about it, and I was totally unqualified to even hear these things. And then finally he went into Srila Prabhupada, and he said to him, he said, Prabhupada, it feels like someone has ripped my heart. He was being very honest to Prabhupada, very open and honest, and he just said, and I was sitting right beside him. He said, it feels like my heart has been ripped out. He said, I have such attachment. And I couldn't imagine how would he respond to this? And Prabhupada looked at him. He said, yes. He said, attachment to the wife, he said, is very strong. Just last night, he said, I dreamt about my wife. What could he say? What could this disciple say to Prabhupada? He just put it back at him and said, you just have to tolerate. He said, you're sannyas. He said, what? You said, now you're a sannyasi. But he said it like that, like, I'm also a person. He said the same thing when one of his servants was struggling. We all, most of us, we struggled. I always struggled. Being with Prabhupada was wonderful, but it also very much meant you had no regulation. Prabhupada was regulated, but we weren't. You're chanting, morning program, everything just centered around Prabhupada, so we didn't have that routine that he said was so very important for all of us. Our routine wasn't a routine. It varied one place to the next, this time zone, that time zone. Prabhupada adapted immediately, but for us, it was a little difficult. Your diet, every temple you go to, they're eating differently, cooking differently. So it had challenges, even we were young. Anyway, his servant said to Prabhupada one day, Prabhupada, I have such difficulty controlling my tongue. Prabhupada said, I also have a tongue. In other words, I also have to control my tongue. Imagine every day Prabhupada could have a feast. Like we see our sannyasis sometime, you go into the prasada room, and all the different bags, mahaprasadam there. We're all looking at them, lusting for the mahaprasadam. Maybe he'll give me a little of this, a little of that. Prabhupada said, I also have a tongue. I've told that Prabhupada, we know. He grew up, his mother was Bengali. What did she cook? We know it was Prabhupada's favorite food, shukta. Every time we cook in Prabhupada's quarters on Sunday, shukta's there. One of Prabhupada's favorite preparations. We know he loved kachoris. But he didn't every day say, put kachoris on my plate. As he said, he also has to digest things. Although his sister, his little sister, Baba Tarini, Pishima, she would get mad at us because we tried to give Prabhupada a nice, simple. Prabhupada said we should all eat simple, nice mode of goodness. And she would want to give him lots of not so simple, fried in mustard oil. Whew. Just smelling mustard oil is enough to give me indigestion. It's so strong. Mustard oil. She said, Prabhupada can digest nails if he wants. That was what she said. She had more, stronger faith than even we did. We're thinking, no, we have to, Prabhupada has to eat very simply. She said he can digest nails. But she would cook for him in Calcutta, as I said, every day. When we got to Calcutta, she was so eager to take care of her big brother. Prabhupada was her big brother. Imagine her situation, to be born, Prabhupada's little sister, completely attached to Srila Prabhupada she was. I first met her that 1973, and she was like a little female version of Prabhupada. You know, she was about, Prabhupada was not so tall, maybe 5'6", so she's like 5 foot. A little rounder though. But she had a face just like Prabhupada's. Initially it was kind of frightening to see, because no one can look like Prabhupada. But she did. And she would cook for Prabhupada. She would come to that temple on Albert Road. Whenever Prabhupada was there, every day she would bring sweets from K.C. Das. That was the local sweet maker. They were bona fide sweets. Prabhupada would eat them, distribute them. He didn't distribute so many of those because they were the good ones. We would make sweets for distribution, but he liked the sandesh, rasgulla, rasmalai. These things would come in. And then she would go in the kitchen. And of course, we were trained up. In the kitchen, you had your various spices, you know, your little spice container with the 6 or 7 things in it, you know, all your different spices in there. And we had ghee. From the very beginning, Prabhupada cooked everything in ghee. And it's what he told us was one of the secret weapons, was ghee, cooking in ghee. When he spoke about restaurants, from the very beginning, as soon as he got to New York City, and read the letters, he was writing Sally Agarwal. We heard this morning, it was the Agarwal, Mr. Agarwal, that's who sponsored Prabhupada, so that he could get his voyage to America. And Sally, she was American girl. Mr. Agarwal, of course, he was Indian. She was American. And when Prabhupada got to New York and he was feeding the devotees, he was cooking for them, and they were taking prasadam, he told Sally, come to New York, open up a restaurant. He said, right away. Prabhupada was thinking, he said, you open up a restaurant, you serve samosa, kachori, like that. He said, you'll do very good business. He said, people are eager. And it was the taste of ghee Prabhupada was talking about. People are very eager, he said, to take prasadam. But when Pishima would come to the temple, she had 2 bottles that she would tuck. Pishima didn't, she just wore a sari, you know, Bengali style. There was just a sari, there was no choli. It was just a lot of sari wrapped around her. But she had these 2 bottles tucked in, like in a holster, a gun holster, you know. They were her weapons. One was Ganga Jal. And everyone, she would see you, she'd flick Ganga Jal, you know, for our benefit. I'm not sure what she was thinking when she did it. Maybe it made us, you know, safe for her to be around. She'd purify us. Like that. And the other bottle was mustard oil. Because I was the only person in all of ISKCON that had a bottle of mustard oil. Because I massaged Prabhupada with mustard oil, right? Never dreamed of pouring it into a wok and cooking in it. Looking back, I'm sure I could have, and Prabhupada would say, what is this? Bitter melon had fried in mustard oil instead of ghee. He said, what is this? Use mustard oil? And neither would he have complained. But we never thought about it. There was only ghee. No olive oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil, canola oil. No, just ghee. But she had a bottle of mustard oil. Jamuna says, Prabhupada had his sister train Jamuna in cooking. Jamuna learned from Pishima, it wasn't you just went out and bought a bottle of mustard oil. There were many different kinds, varieties, qualities of mustard oil for cooking. Not that you just pick up the cheapest one on the shelf here at the Goswami store and you use it as mustard oil. No, there was a great science there. Anyway, she would cook. I cooked for Prabhupada in Calcutta. We had the cooker. Prabhupada trained me up from the very first day I was his servant. He showed me how he wanted me to cook. And it should all be done within 1 hour. Not 5 hours, starting the day before, making preparations, starting 7 o'clock in the morning, make this, make that. No. You set up the cooker. He actually showed me, he had me massage him in the kitchen in Dallas. That was the first temple I was with Prabhupada, where he showed me how to cook for 3 days in a row. This cooker was a mystery to me, this steamer cooker. But he showed me how to set it up, put the dal in the bottom, up in the top was the container with the rice. You would steam the rice. You would steam all the vegetables in between. So we set it all up. Prabhupada cut the vegetables. He had me wash the rice. Prabhupada wasn't, also he was another one. There was no question of watching. You're always doing something. He didn't like waiting and watching. I carried that onto my business. There were two words you could, I'd say, what are you doing? They'll say, I'm watching you. I'd say, you don't watch. I said, get to work. Prabhupada was the exact same. You couldn't just watch him. You had to be doing something. So he's cutting vegetables. So I'm watching him. He said, wash the rice. No, do something. That was Prabhupada's. Do something. Don't just stand here looking at me. That wasn't his way. So I went over to the sink, just 1-2 meters away, went to this kitchen sink, and put the water in there, from this tap, swirling the rice around, pour it out very carefully, because I was trained by Kirtanananda. Wash the rice 3 times, right? Or basmati, right? So, you see all that white filmy stuff come off. Poured it off. Prabhupada's on the other side of the room, cutting up vegetables for the cooker. So I put more water in, swirl it around, and I go like this. He says, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm washing the rice, Prabhupada, 3 times. He said, once is enough. That was the beginning of my training. Was keep it simple. He trained different devotees in different ways. You read Jamuna's stories, her experience. What Prabhupada, when she was cooking for her sister's wedding, what Prabhupada, first thing he said to her? Wash your hands. What's the next thing he said to her? Wash your hands. Kept telling her, wash your hands. He told her if there's one speck of black on the bottom of the pot, no good. Wash it, clean it, scrub it, polish it. But he had a different method with me. It was simple. And I guess he also understood my mentality. Panchagoda knows my mentality very well. It's like this. Prabhupada said I was easygoing. When they said Sutakirti, he could be president in Hawaii. Prabhupada smiled. He said, no, he's too easygoing. Sometimes Panchagoda is easygoing, sometimes not. You have to know. There's a balance. But me, he knew. I didn't have that. I was easygoing. It wasn't bad he didn't criticize it. It was a nature. We all have a nature. And Prabhupada understood everyone's nature. And because of that, he knew how to engage them in service. Anyway, for 3 days he showed me simple spicing. Just a spoonful of ghee to make the chants for this sabji, that sabji. And efficient. The first thing we did, you've all seen pictures of Prabhupada's cooker. Has the rounded lid on the top. It's not like the cooker here in his room. There was the cooker. That cooker is held by Shruti Rupa, my god sister right now. So the top was a lid, a rounded lid with little handles. You flip it over, it's a wok. It was a wok just this big. So after the massage, which lasted an hour and a half, in general, the miracle was those vegetables were steaming for an hour and a half. But you had to know exactly how to adjust that flame so that they didn't all just turn to mush, that they had some substance to them. He also showed me how to do that. Everything. You could turn them to mush in 20 minutes if the flame was too high. For over 2 years, I would massage Prabhupada in one place and the cooker could be in a completely different building. And all I'm thinking is, I hope things aren't burning. I hope it's not overcooked. I hope it's not undercooked. And by a miracle, I never burn anything, never overcooked. I don't say it with pride, I say it was a miracle. Everything always worked out. So after massage that first day, in which he also showed me how to massage him, I was massaging his leg. I didn't ever massage anyone before. Prabhupada said anyone can massage. Wasn't true. He had a lot of suggestions as we went along. And if you had sweaty palms, don't even touch him. He won't even let you touch him. Another miracle, I never sweat in those days. So you could massage as hard as you wanted, he said. And I was massaging his leg. He would sit on the floor and then put his leg straight out. And as I was squeezing, he grabbed my thighs with both his hands and started massaging my thigh. That was my first massage I ever got was by Prabhupada. He started squeezing. He said like this. Yes, Prabhupada. Then I went back and did like that. So everything, he would show you just how he wanted things done. So then after massage, we stood up in that kitchen in Dallas. Same kitchen's there, Prabhupada's quarters. Gurley Street, Dallas, Texas. Radha Kalachandji. Kalachandji, big, black marble Krishna. Gorgeous deities. We turned over that lid, which was a wok. He said, put a few tablespoons of ghee in it. And then we put in some cumin seed, little coriander, little asafoetida, little turmeric. That's pretty much all that was available in all the temples in the US at this time. And then, let everything brown a little. Then he had me grab the wok. He said like this, and he poured some of the chants into the dal. That was the dal. Then there was another few vegetables. He turned it to wet vegetable. And we poured some of the same chants into that. And then there was a little chants left. So with the one chants, then we put some of the vegetables that were in the wok or in the cooker and put them in and sauteed them into. So even one chants, boom, 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 3 preparations just like that. Always say it was 3 years later, here in Vrindavan, Prabhupada in Vrindavan, he wanted very much that we were not extravagant, that we practiced austerities in the land of Krishna, that we set a very nice example for everyone. So he had a group of his disciples, but then also, Dr. Kapoor was there, his godbrother, different people were there, friends of his from the past. And Prabhupada said, Sutakirti, he cooks my whole lunch 45 minutes. He said, not that we spend so much time maintaining the body. Isn't that right, Sutakirti? Yes, Prabhupada. And I said, while it's cooking, I'm giving you massage. He said, yes, massage and lunch, 45 minutes. Not that we spend hours and hours maintaining this body. So in Mayapur, his sister would cook. Prabhupada said she was expert. He said, my mother, she told me in one evening massage was the most personal, intimate time to be with Srila Prabhupada. He would drift off and tell you stories when he was 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old, with such pleasure, his childhood. He had puffed rice for dinner that night. Puffed rice was one of his favorite go-to meals. He said because it was light. He called me in his room, it was in Juhu. He said, tonight, make puffed rice. Puffed rice meant puffed rice with peanuts. Muri. Puffed rice, peanuts, nice chawns, turmeric, hing like that, salty. Little peanuts fried, little toasted peanuts. He said, tonight make puffed rice. He said, because last night, the night before, he had me make him puris and potato eggplant sabji. Yes, Prabhupada ate eggplant. One of his favorite vegetables was eggplant. So he had me make puris, and these puris, they weren't chapuris, they were complete white flour puris, fried in ghee. And he's eating it 9 o'clock at night, Prabhupada. So he said that. He said, last night, he said, I had puris and sabji. He said, and it made it a little difficult to get up to do my translating work, which was also funny. He said, so tonight, make puffed rice. Because he didn't want that distraction, getting up. But Prabhupada enjoyed puris and sabji because he had a tongue. He liked too, just like we like to eat. We like to eat nighttime, we like to eat daytime. We have tongues, but we have to learn how to control these things as well to maximize our service. Prabhupada did it. He didn't have anyone he was answering to, but that's what he told me. Make puffed rice and peanuts, and always hot milk every night. I can't remember one evening he didn't have his hot milk at night. Boiling hot with a little sweetener. Another time, see, he would never tell me how to sweeten it, and I never put anything else in it. I didn't put turmeric in it, I didn't put banana, I didn't put anything. I put sugar in it. So he came by the room one evening. He said, sweeten it with honey tonight. So immediately, another one of my alarms. I said, Prabhupada, you boil honey? I said, doesn't it turn to poison? He said, put honey in it. So that's how he trained me. All these different, this rule, that rule, everything he just threw out the window, just do it. It was just do it. That was his method. So I just did it. He never told me it was too sweet or not sweet enough. Whatever it was I brought, he always seemed satisfied with it. It was very kind of him, but it was kind of a miracle. But his sister in Calcutta, she would cook. We would cook as he showed us. Rice, chapatis, dal, just a little ghee, not spicy hot. Little bit, maybe little bit of, we didn't have fresh green chilies even at that time, but a little whatever, ground chili, whatever you call it, might be there, but just a little bit. Little this, little that, little ghee. But his sister was over there cooking up a storm. Because Prabhupada said, he said, my mother, she was expert cook. She would make her own rice, puffed rice. He described it. He remembers all as a child. He said she had a big, thick wok, right? And you would have sand in the wok. And you would get it very, very hot. And then you would put particular rice in there, and it puffed, just like popcorn. You'd puff, then you strained it all out. He said, my sister, she was also expert cook. My mother taught her. And then he said, I'm also expert cook. He said, but I learned just by watching. And he would say that about various things, how expert. He didn't have teachers. He would just watch and learn. This was Prabhupada's. And he liked to say sometimes to his disciples, just by watching, he said, I would learn. But his sister, she's cooking, and she's making all her Bengali primo, first-class preparations. If you hear me speak at times, I always say threes. Threes. Very often things would happen in threes. So I remember in Calcutta, I would go in, I would bring the American-style prasadam in one plate. Then I would go back into the kitchen and get Pishima's Bengali khana, bring that back in, put it down. So he did that one day, and then did it the next day, and then the third day came. So I bring in his nice, Prabhupada said I cooked nice American prasadam. It was kind of a halfway compliment. He said, very good American prasadam, because it's not very spicy. So then I went back and I get Pishima's Bengali made prasadam, because she didn't bring it in. I would bring in the plate. I described those doors, the French doors that opened out into Prabhupada's room in Calcutta. So I have the plate, and I'm not even inside Prabhupada's room. I'm at the door, and I'm about to walk in, and he goes, don't bring that in here. He said, my sister's trying to kill me. And then he looks at me, who by this time, 6 months in India, the last 3 months I've already been sick with every known disease you can get in India. And he looks at me and says, you eat it. And it was the first, I think it was the only time I refused an order by my spiritual master. I said, I can't eat that, Prabhupada. I said, I'm already sick. He said, well, distribute it to your God brothers. He said, don't bring it in here. But it's because he liked it. But he said, don't, because if I would bring it in and sit it down, he'd be eating it. That was the point. Don't bring it in, he said. She's trying to kill me. This is also, sometimes we hear about Prabhupada using that expression, poison. He said, she's trying to poison me. Poison was a word, Bengali word, used in a lot of different circumstances. You do anything that's not right, it's poison. Anything that's not good for you, it's poison. So Prabhupada would say like that. But she said he can eat nails. So they had different understanding. So in that place, Calcutta Temple, the first time I went there, I was with Prabhupada for 4 months. So that routine I had down. Some things were difficult. Even getting your rounds chanted. Usually the best time was on the morning walk. Prabhupada chanted his rounds on the morning walk. And he liked us. We were always with him. So he would chant, we would chant. That was the program. So we arrived there in the daytime. Prabhupada has his lunch prasadam. And in the early evening, he gives darshan to the devotees. It's just a small room. His room was everything. His bed was in his room. His sitting, just like Radha Damodar Temple. It was like that. A little bit bigger. But it's where he ate, where he slept, where he did his translating work, where he gave darshan, everything in that one spot. So before he took rest that night, if you haven't been to the Calcutta Temple, on the first floor, nice temple room. It's about the size of this room, maybe a little smaller. And then just next to it was a small room. That was Prabhupada's room. And along the whole front was a veranda about this wide and almost twice as long, marble veranda that was open to the sky, open to the weather. It was very, that part was, the veranda was nice. But Prabhupada had no privacy. He could hear everything. Imagine, the temple room was literally right against his wall. So he's listening to 6 aratiks a day, classes, kirtans, devotees walking back and forth in the veranda. He never complained, never said, I can't do my work, I can't do my translating here, too much noise, I can't concentrate here. Never complained. But he called me into his room, rang his bell. So this is his room. I was right there on the other side of the door. It was 2 meters away. He could have just said, Shruta. I would have heard him. That's how close he was. But he rang his bell. I went in, offered obeisances, and he looked at me. He said, does your nose work? And I said, what? He said, your nose. Your nose. Does your nose work? Do you snore? I said, oh no, Prabhupada. Of course, no one knows really if you snore, right? Because you're sleeping. But I right away said, no, I don't snore. He said, good. Because if you snore, he said, you can't sleep outside the doors. Because one of my services was literally to sit in front of those doors during the day and lie down in front of those doors at night so no one could open them. We talk about, being the dog of the spiritual master. You literally got to understand what it meant because you were just there, just like a very loyal dog, just there waiting for your master to call you. So you could go in and wag your tail. Yes, Prabhupada, what can I do? We were so eager. So I would lie there every night. It was the closest I was ever to his room, was in Calcutta. Other places, like here in Vrindavan, there were spaces, but there no space. And then I would wake up 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, because he's on the other side of those doors, which were just framed glass doors with a curtain for privacy. And he would be translating Srimad Bhagavatam. At that time it was 3rd canto. And you could hear him. I would lie there and I would wake up off and on, just as he was clicking his microphone, off and on, speaking, taking all all the Vedic knowledge that was there, all the commentaries from the predecessor acharyas, reading all of that, reading the translation, speaking the translation, and then reading what they had, and then taking all that in, and then he would speak into the dictaphone machine. And you could hear every word. Me not being a very astute philosophical person, I didn't sit up and think, I want to hear every word he has to say. I would just lie there trying to sleep, because you would go to bed around 10 o'clock at night because you're massaging him every night, 10 o'clock, 10:30. Then 4 o'clock you have to be up. So I like to take rest. But I would lie there and I would wake up to the sound of this deep voice speaking, as he said, his emotional ecstasies, every word, so carefully. And then there was on that switch, he could rewind it. And sometimes he would rewind it for the last 10 seconds, and he would play it back. And he would listen himself to what he had just said. And if he liked it, he would continue. And sometimes he would click it back again, and he would say something maybe a little different, little emphasis this way, that way. But as he said, every word was Krishna. Because the whole time I was with him, I saw him do many, many things. Everything he was telling us to do. I saw him chanting on his japa beads. His bead bag was always there with him. It was never left on the doorknob crying. He had his bead bag, be chanting his rounds. Other times in the afternoon was a time he liked to read his books. When I first saw it, that was another wonder moment. So Prabhupada reading his books. They're his books. On the plane, he would read his Bhagavad-Gita as it is. And he looked, me and Pradyumna were sitting next to him. And he knew we found it fascinating. Prabhupada's reading his books. And he looked at us. He said, what author do you know reads his own books? He said, once they're finished with a book, they just go on to the next one. They don't go back to it and read it. He said, they go on to the next one. He said, no author reads his own books. He said, but why am I reading this Bhagavad-Gita as it is? And he said, because they're not my words, they're Krishna's words. And he said the same thing to me about every one of his books. 3 different ones, he said it to me over the course of 2 years. As I saw him reading his books, he relished them. He relished Krishna book. He would laugh reading the stories, Krishna and Balaram killing demons. He'd be totally absorbed in it. So I found that so wonderful. So whatever he told us to do, he was doing it. He was going to class every morning. When the devotees, just like we go to class in the morning and we read the verses, the Prabhupada didn't lead the verse, Pradyumna would lead. And Prabhupada would respond, just like the rest of us. He was a devotee. He considered himself a devotee. When Rupanuga, once in the airport, we're all sitting, the devotees were sitting around. It was an internal flight, so many devotees were going to fly, whether maybe it was from New York to Chicago, or at that time it was an inexpensive, quick flight. So there was 20 devotees all sitting with Prabhupada, mostly on the floor. Sometimes some of the seniors would sit on the chair next to him. And then they called for the flight announcement, time to board. So Rupanuga, he was always a leader. And he says, all the devotees get up and get into line to board the flight. And the devotees get up, and Prabhupada got up to get into line. Rupanuga said, no, Prabhupada, sit down. He said, what, I'm not a devotee? That's humility, huh? We talk, huh? We're asking what humility is. That's humility, understanding. I'm just a devotee of Krishna. That was my good fortune to see Prabhupada go on the other side of the door. You know, there was the outside of the door. He was our spiritual master. He was the ambassador from the spiritual world. Vaikuntha man, Shaktavish avatar, pure devotee. And then when he went inside his room, he was just a lover of Krishna. Liked to chant on his beads, liked to read the books, Bhagavatam, not his books, the books. He would read his books. Sometimes he would get the harmonium. He would sit, if there was a harmonium in his room, the manor had a nice room, nice harmonium. Many times, Prabhupada in the afternoon. Afternoon was his time. Morning time, just like you do, you know, up until 12, up until lunchtime, he's serving all the devotees. That's what he did. Morning class, japa, morning walk, conversations, training his disciples. Then he had lunch, a short nap, and then he had his time. His time meant he was reading his books, or he'd sit down, play the harmonium, and chant bhajans. And I would hear him, and I would run into the room, offer obeisances, and then he'd go, get the cartels. Yes, get the cartels. You sit there and you can play cartels, as he would chant. And the one day I said, Prabhupada, I said, it was a silly thing. I said, Prabhupada, I said, your chanting is not like anyone else. And he just smiled. He said, yes. He said, I have my own style. Prabhupada had his own style. But it's a style he showed us. And he liked us to follow in his style. He set the example for everything. Set the example in kirtans, classes, here in Vrindavan, just like we do. That's the formula. You know, class till 9 o'clock. Prabhupada said, speaking half an hour. He said, because after that, everyone's going this way. Even Prabhupada was speaking. He said half an hour. And if you listen to his classes, you'll see generally they're about half an hour. So everything he did, he was showing us what to do. We say every day, founder acharya, founder acharya, founder acharya. That's what it means. He set the example for everything we can do. Every part of his life is an example. So we have about 10 minutes left. There's a sign outside which probably needs to be changed. It said Daiva Shakti was speaking tonight. I know you announce it in the morning. So anyway, all of you come and hear from my God brothers and God sisters. They all have wonderful realizations being with Srila Prabhupada. And they're inspirational, all of them. So please come and hear. But if anyone has any questions or comments, we have a few minutes left.
Sometimes when we hear the different paths and the Prabhupada, the mind wants to think this ordinary person doing ordinary activities. How do we know it's Shaktavesh Avatar, or the whole thing about the Siddha, the Prabhupada coming to America, all like chants.
I guess, he said, when we tell these pastimes, and of course me in particular, I'll tell pastimes and say very ordinary. Prabhupada did very ordinary things. Like he said, I have a tongue, I have a mind, I have all these things. He had likes, he had dislikes. So how do we understand him as Shaktavish Avatar, pure devotee? Of course, we look at his accomplishments. You know, I don't spend a lot of time, because everyone else does, and we all know those things. I like to give intimate glimpse of Srila Prabhupada, very personal glimpse of Srila Prabhupada, because I had that opportunity. But seeing, as I wrote the other day, spread Krishna consciousness all around the world, from 70 to 80, 82 years old, around the world 14 times, opened 108 temples, trained thousands of disciples, brought the Hare Krishna mantra to every town and village, literally every town and village. But all of those, to me, they paled in comparison to his giving us his books, the Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad-Gita, Chaitanya Charitamrita. It's unheard of what Prabhupada did. And he gave them to us, as he said, for the next 10,000 years, for this golden age of Lord Chaitanya, which goes for 10,000 years. More and more nowadays we can see what that means. Because the golden age doesn't mean it's going to be, the whole world's going to be enveloped in sweetness. It means there's going to be more and more divisions of the devotees and the demoniac, which we see happening before our eyes every day, every month. So Prabhupada gave us, and he said, and he also separated the temples, his ISKCON society, from the BBT, which he made a trust, because no matter what was going to happen to us, no matter what would happen to his temples, like he said, at least maintain these temples. But aside from all of that, his books, he expected them that they would be there for everyone in the future. Anyone that had a little sincerity, a little curiosity. He said just by opening it and reading one word, he said it'll change their life. He said they could become Krishna conscious just by reading one word of his books. That was the potency of his books. So literally his books were Krishna, and they were deities. We see on some days we put his books on the altar. They're worshipable as deities. So he wanted that everyone had the opportunity to have one of his books in their place of residence. So that was Prabhupada's gift to everyone. Prabhupada, as he said, he wanted to liberate the entire world. He never thought in small ways. He would go to countries like Mauritius, say this entire island, this entire country can become Krishna conscious. So wherever he go, he would say things. This whole country can become Krishna conscious. And that was his desire. To me, the fact that he did all these little things and had no material desires, see, that's my appreciation and why I'm here. I got to see him. There was no private life that he had. Every moment was open to the public. He had nothing he was hiding from anyone, So he was chanting, he was reading, he was doing his bhajan, he was always preaching, he was barely sleeping to give everyone Krishna consciousness. So that in itself, and Prabhupada himself, I was talking about his childhood pastimes, and I was told how, when his mother said, no, too late for puris. So that was there also from the very beginning. So he was also remembering that when he said, give me puffed rice. Because that was his mother's, even when he was a child. She'd say, no, it's late, eat puffed rice. And he'd say, no, I want puris. Then again he'd say, eat puffed rice. And he'd say, no, I want puris. And then finally his father said, if he wants puris, give him puris. And the Prabhupada said, perhaps my father knew. So even Prabhupada knew knew his position as devotee, what he was given the power to do by his spiritual master. That's how he saw it. He was empowered by his spiritual master. And because he followed his instruction, cent per cent, that potency was there. And he would say to us, we can all do this same thing, but just see how difficult is that, huh? What it means to be pure devotee, cent per cent, sold out to your spiritual master. And just as he said in that letter, there was not one moment in my life where I didn't remember Krishna. You know, to be able to say that, who can say such a thing? There wasn't he remembered back to the beginning of his life, and he's saying, there wasn't a moment I didn't remember Krishna. So that was Prabhupada. So we're very fortunate. We're all followers of Srila Prabhupada. Yes?
You were speaking about the ghee, the Prabhupada wanted ghee always.
Ghee, yes, ghee.
It is for him or for everyone he used to.
Ghee. I've told how he would send ghee from Australia, tons of ghee, to pay the BBT, the book bill. That's how Australia at times paid their BBT book bill, which that was rule number 1 for Prabhupada. The books go out and you pay for them. But Australia paid for them in liquid gold, ghee, by sending ghee to India, so his disciples could eat food cooked in pure cow's ghee. Something that was not very available here in India. He knew everything in India was contaminated, cheated. You know, now supposedly there's many purveyors of pure ghee in India, but who knows, you know, what's going on in there. But that's how much Prabhupada wanted us to have ghee. In 1955, Prabhupada wrote an article for his BTG magazine, and in it he mentioned how this refined oil is very bad for your health. That was 1955, what to speak of now. So we won't say anything more about that. But Prabhupada's process was ghee from the beginning, ghee. And in Australia, those people were so fallen, they argued with Prabhupada sitting there when he was giving class. They would ask all kinds of challenging questions. And Prabhupada said, give these people a lot of prasadam. He said, because they need to purify. And then he made that preparation. He said, because they're so attached to meat. Prabhupada made a preparation that he called Meat Eater's Delight. And it had a lot of fried paneer. So it had paneer cheese, deep fried in ghee. And then there was specific spicing and potatoes and eggplant and lots of paneer. So that was his way to purify before any real understanding could be there of spiritual life. That's what he did. So it's time. Aratika is there. The class is open. Everyone inside and outside, please be here tomorrow at this time. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.